Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because, well, it would be shellfish not to. I'm so sorry. Today, we are talking about a book that has been featured heavily on the channel since its very inception, Turning Darkness into Light by Marie Brennan. Some disclaimers before we start. I was sent this copy of this book for free from the publisher for review. Nevertheless, nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I am going to keep this spoiler free for this book, but if you do not want to be spoiled for the Natural History of Dragons series, which looks like this, click away now because this book will spoil that for you. I'm just going to show you the cover a little bit close up very quickly before I put it back. Don't look at my face, look at this beautiful cover. There we go. This is a standalone book in the same universe as the Natural History of Dragons series, or I think they're also called The Memoirs of Lady Trent. This is marketed in the UK as an adult series, but I think it would probably work for YA readers as well. This came out at the end of 2019, when tiny little baby Judith, it wasn't that long ago, but she was so much more naive than I am now, was just starting this channel, just with little more than a mobile phone and a dream. Hopefully the quality of footage has gone up, but my love for this book has not changed. Marie Brennan is a former archaeologist and folklorist who currently lives in San Francisco. She has written all sorts of things, but I personally know her best for her Natural History of Dragons series, which I devoured when, probably within the first year of me starting book blogging. I just absorbed those books and I don't own them and I desperately want to. Turning Darkness into Light takes place 2 generations down from the original series. We're dealing with Lady Trent's granddaughter Audrey. Audrey's become a philologist, a study of ancient languages essentially, and she's recruited by a very wealthy man to translate the tablets that he has found, which have ancient draconian text on them. Most significantly, this collection of tablets includes what may be a draconian epic, a story that might include some hints as to the past relationship between the draconian people and humans. So Audrey's all set to translate, but as with the adventures of her grandmother, things are rarely that simple, and Audrey finds herself wrapped up in something that goes much further than just translation. This book was basically written with me in mind. I'm a former archaeologist who loves dragons. I thought the original series had been written with me in mind, but when you get to this book and they're translating ancient languages and they have whole transcripts where you can see them trying to figure out the different translations and the potential meaning of words, it was like it was speaking directly to me. Add in discovering a new mythology and the ethics of archaeology just into that mix and you basically have Judith catnip. I'm allergic to cats, but I think that still works. If you include a whole dose of women in academia having to stand up to men, then it's sort of a bit like, I'm beginning to slightly wonder if maybe Marie Brennan is just me from the future, but like who has become a good writer, who has gone back in time to write these books so that I can enjoy them. Just a tiny part of my brain wonders. I appreciate not everyone is going to have quite such a personal connection to the subject matter, but suffice to say, I think this book does a really good job of bringing together a lot of archaeological and philological discourse, which, especially when you're thinking about the equivalent time period, this is fantasy, but it's historical, sort of. These are conversations that we have now about the ethics of archaeology then. It's just bringing real world stuff into a fantasy setting and I find it very cool. Audrey, as you will know if you were watching my vlogs when I was first picking up the Rainwild series by Robin Hobb, I love a female academic and you make that female academic interested in dragons and I'm basically going to adore them. Having loved Lady Trent in the original series, I was pretty sure I was going to love Audrey too. What I found really interesting is that Audrey is a very cool character. She's quite frequently getting herself into these scrapes and scuffles with the law and various other things because of what she believes in. But because you get most of her story through her diary and letters she sends to other people, it's quite self-deprecating and she doesn't really see the value of her own actions. So it's an interesting perspective on a character. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting as a real reflection of how the way we see ourselves can be very different. I don't think Audrey sees herself as a main character in the grand scheme of things, but she so is. The plot is very cool. I've mentioned that there are these action sequences and conspiracies, but the majority of the book is focused on translating these ancient tablets. I'm still not really sure how Marie Brennan managed to make that feel like the most interesting aspect of the book, but she really does. This is one of those books where once I start reading it, I can't stop, which is even more significant given that I was rereading this. I already knew what happened, but I was still like, no, I've got to find out, I've got to get to the end. weird. I think again the format plays into that. We have these diary entries and pieces from newspapers and such, and your brain has to fill in the gaps. And because that's how I read, I fill in the gaps with even more excitement. It's not always the most solid format for a book to do this diary entry kind of thing, but in this case I think you have the right balance of information given and information withheld. It just feels right and fun and good and exciting. It is tricky to talk about the representation in this book because none of the places are technically real. It is a fantasy world, but there's very clear analogies drawn to the real world. So Skirland, where they live, is very clearly England, and other places you can draw parallels between them and real world places and real world culture. So Audrey is mixed race, which is referenced in the story fairly often. As ever, I don't think I'm the best person to comment on how good or bad that representation is, or where we draw the line between fantasy and reality, but I do think it's something to keep in mind when you're reading this series. As well as the Natural History of Dragons books, it's something to keep in mind when you're reading those as well. If you are thinking about reading this is actually my favourite. Of all of any books in the Natural History of Dragons universe, this is my favourite. I think because it hits so many personal yeses for me. If you want to read this, and you are thinking about reading the Natural History of Dragons books, absolutely go and read those first. As I say, it will spoil them for you. I've probably a little bit spoiled them for you, so take some time, forget that you watched this video, and then go and read them. If you aren't fussed at all about those, then you could read this on its own, but I wouldn't recommend it. Some comparisons, some other books you might want to read. I am still working on my books that feature dragons video. It will come at some point in the future. It may already be out by the time you're watching this, I don't know. But I have two things. I've already mentioned Robin Hobb's Rainwild's Quartet. I think that is absolutely well worth reading, especially if you like a female academic. And I thought the other book that I've read which has an interesting look at dragons and dragon relationships with humanity is Seraphina by Rachel Hartman, and I will recommend it until the cows come home. It is one of my favourite dragon books. So maybe I'm completely blinded by my own preferences and this isn't as good as I think it is, but you know when you just find a book that is written for you? This is that book for me. Comment below, is there any book that does that for you? Which books so weirdly encompass all of your interests? I'd be really interested to know. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, you can follow me on all of my social media and you can subscribe because it makes me feel loved and appreciated as much as this book does. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Don't swivel, please.